What was your interest in slash familiarity with MMOs before working on them?
In college, shortly after I graduated from high school, my friends were all excited about some new game that they'd heard of. They're like, it's amazing, you gotta check it out. We're gonna sneak on the college campus, go up to the lab, pretend like we're students and play this online multiplayer game. Like, this is amazing. So then I started playing it and I was immediately hooked and it was incredible. And you could like move around to different rooms and attack things and attack people and level up and stuff. And so that was MUDs, and it was my first introduction to kind of multiplayer online games. I don't know if they would qualify as like massively multiplayer because it was, be hundreds of people, not thousands. But it was definitely like this is like the gateway to what's now modern MMOs.
At the time, they were pretty massive.
Yeah.
Given what the internet technology could do.
And given that, I think back then something like 4% of people had access to the internet. It was pretty hard to get. And like we didn't, at the time I didn't have it at home. I had to go sneak into a computer lab to play.
What was your familiarity with EverQuest at the time?
I'd been watching some of the videos that they were showing. There were some teasers that Variant or 989 Studios was doing to showcase the game and kind of what it would look like and where you go. And I was like, this looks incredible. I got to get a copy of this. So the day it came out, I went to every software store in town and nobody had it. They were sold out. And it wasn't until a couple days later that they got in some more copies. And I was able to get a copy of the game.
Awesome.
And I still have my receipt somewhere. I think it's in my office.
How would you describe the team culture when you started?
It's definitely different. It was a lot of younger people for sure. There were guys who had dropped out of college to come out there and do that. There were guys that had no college. It was definitely a younger crew. I want to say there were people on the team when I joined that weren't old enough to drink yet.
Yeah.
And so it was a different vibe. At that point, like they were coming out from all over. A lot of guys came from Florida. But people were interested in working on EverQuest and being there and working on the game, so they came out from all over. A lot of guys would live in houses, like they would rent a house and you'd get 3 to 8 people would be in this house together, and as people would rotate out for whatever reason, new people would show up and rotate in, and there was always something going on, all the parties and get-togethers and stuff. Yeah, it was good. It was a nice way to like hang out with your coworkers after work when we're all 20-something nerds and we could talk about the game or the gaming industry or what kind of drink we're gonna drink and yeah.
So what were your initial duties at EverQuest or on EverQuest?
When I first started, I got my foot in the door doing technical support. A lot of that was phone support. Some of it was email. Some of it was the forums. And it was something that I did to work my way through college. I was doing tech support there for internet and software, so it was something I was able to kind of leverage to get in there.
So what would be like the average role of a tech support person back in the day for EverQuest? Like what kind of requests were you fielding? Like what kind of complaints were you dealing with? Like what was your job like?
I thought it was going to be solving technical problems, and it was to a degree, but I'd say at least half of the contacts were billing issues. Someone would call up and be like, I got billed, it says EverQuest, I have no idea what this is. My grandson's on the computer a lot, and I'd be like, okay.
So it was
Let me tell you what's happening.
some kids getting their parents' credit cards, maybe?
Yeah. In some cases, yeah.
Wow.
So when it was technical, I was either through email or through phone calls or through the forums. I was helping people get connected. Sometimes they had a virus. Sometimes they put the EverQuest installer on their desktop and ran it from there and just installed thousands of files to their desktop instead of to the EverQuest directory. A lot of it was helping people get online. It was still fairly early in the days of the internets, and people were struggling to get connected.
Yeah. Before you were a lead designer, you were a design apprentice, which sounds very magical and fantasy-like. So what was a design apprentice?
Oh, it was like the dream come true. They put out the call to have people who were interested in working on the design team submit applications to showcase our ability to write or come up with cool game ideas or expansion ideas or zone ideas. And then based off of that, there were a number of interviews. And so I want to say there were like 4 of us who were brought over from different departments, from customer service or tech support or QA. as design apprentices, and they sat us all down together and kind of showed us how to get into the game and how to use the tools and how to make content. And we started doing, basic stuff. Like somebody who was making trade skills would be like, I need to write some books that explain how to do these trade skill combines. This is perfect for a newbie. Here you go. Or I need some simple quests in this zone that I'm working on. Have at it. And there was a tremendous amount of creative freedom there, and they let us kind of do what we wanted. I felt like the guys who came in from customer service, like in-game support, had an advantage because they knew all the in-game commands. They knew how to teleport places and create things and do things. And I had no idea how to do any of that, so I was like, this is hard. I don't know all these hundreds of commands on how to get around and do things in-game.
Sure.
Yeah.
And as a design apprentice, what were your duties on the legacy of, I'm going to butcher this name, is it Acacia?
I think Acacia is probably the most correct. I've heard people say Acacia too, and I
Acacia?
don't know which one is more correct.
Okay, so I don't feel as bad. So what were your duties on that expansion?
One of the big story points in that expansion was that Nathaniel Marr had blessed the Froglocks of Guk, and a lot of them had ascended and become smarter and more powerful and more noble. And then from Guk, they broke out into Inithul Swamp, and they broke into Grub, and they kicked out the trolls. And so one of the first things I did on the team was set up a new Grob that had been taken over by the Froglocks. I put in a different Froglock population, put in some quests, and at the time it seemed super cool. Looking back on it, it was fairly basic stuff, but man, at the time I thought this is the most incredible thing I've ever done.
Lost Dungeons of Nora was the 6th expansion. What did you and the team want to do with it that the other 5s hadn't done? Or did less from a let's innovate standpoint and more from a let's give players more of what they want perspective?
That one was definitely innovative. That was the first expansion that introduced instances. So we tried to kind of Mad Libs a bunch of dungeon layouts, which worked. It worked okay. It was supposed to save art a bunch of time in generating zones because they made pieces. There were like round pieces and stairs and hallways and big rooms, and they would hit a button and it would jumble them all up and make a dungeon. And they would, could do that until they found one that they liked. And then we made 48 of these, 48 distinct geometries, and then it was design's job to populate those and put in treasure chests, rares, bosses, all the population, all the pathing and stuff. And then we used that same system to make raids, which was kind of our first taking a stab that we took at making instance raid content. And there were some problems, but we ironed those out later.
In general, did an expansion's gameplay or features come before its lore, or did lore inform gameplay features?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I'd say in an expansion like Eldon, the features kind of dictated the gameplay, but there was definitely a lot of discussion about the lore and coming up with what dungeons would seem interesting to players and what would feel familiar yet novel.
One main feature of Lost Dungeons was the inclusion of broad-based instance dungeons, which you'd referred to. Could you describe what those were in general and how that concept was kind of originated?
Yeah, we wanted to put dungeon crawls back into the game, and so this was a gameplay system that allowed a group to get together, pick a dungeon or be assigned a dungeon, go to the entrance of that dungeon, and then work their way from the entrance to some sort of goal point. We at the time thought that like the dungeon crawl experience was kind of more interesting than standing in a single spot and killing, 4 spawns every time they popped up. There's more movement, there's more exploration, there's more, we turned the corner and there's something interesting here. So that was the goal there.
Players could complete quests in 1 of 5 dungeon themes, and each theme had roughly 10 variations. Players could customize their experience by choosing the adventure type and difficulty. What was the process of creating such diverse content?
Oh, it was rough. So we have better systems for that now. At the time, to create level scaling content that would scale from level 2 to level 60 and then 1 difficulty level beyond that, we had to create different versions of the dungeon with its own population. So each one of these entries had to have its own zone header, its own spawns, its own encounters, its own NCDs, its own NPCs, its own treasure tables, its own loot, and because of how many dungeons there were and how many variations there were and how many difficulty levels there were, the amount of data that we had to put in the game to make that happen, I'm sure surpasses every other expansion. Probably multiple expansions combined.
Still speaking to Lost Dungeons, what were the development incentives behind broad-based dungeons? For example, all the variety must have been a good thing for, among other reasons, the fact that it would probably keep most players content until the next expansion rolled around.
Yeah, we were. One of the things I did for that expansion was a lot of beta testing with players. So I think for like a good 6 weeks during beta, I would find 5 or 6 players on the beta server. We would run through a bunch of dungeons, and we would note if things seemed too easy or too hard, if the NPCs, had scaled up to a point that made them too difficult to deal with, or if the population was too dense, or if something was not spawning or stuck on a wall. And after 6 weeks of beta testing it, I still played it for several weeks when it came out on live, maybe another 6 weeks, because I felt like it was still fun. There was definitely like a kernel of gameplay there that was fun. Get players, enter dungeon, complete objective, travel through it, and there was enough randomization too in the population that it wasn't the same every time, and you couldn't necessarily predict if there would be a rare, where it would be, how rooms would be populated. So it felt different enough every time, and not different in a way that made it radically more difficult or more easy.
So how did you become a lead designer on EverQuest?
Tenacity, I guess.
Hard work and determination.
Outlast. Yeah, it's just you don't have to be better than everyone necessarily. You just have to outlast them.
That's very cool. That's advice to live by right there. So how did your experience providing technical support inform your duties as a game designer, if at all?
Oh yeah, I think the troubleshooting was invaluable. I don't think I could have put a price on what I learned from doing tech support at the university and here and other places too. It really helps you narrow down a problem, to try different solutions, not to get stuck on something and bang your head against it. There's always another thing you can try, and it's not a failure to need to go in a different direction to solve a problem.
Mm-hmm. So what were some of the first lessons you learned as a game designer on EverQuest?
That your initial idea isn't necessarily the right idea. I think one of the first things I did was I was able to put mechanics on a raid in Plane of Time, and the idea I came up with was amazing in my head, but it didn't really play out that well. It didn't. what was going on was interesting, but it didn't change the player behavior at all, as far as how they needed to tackle that encounter to win. So there was no real impact from adding that mechanic. So that was a good lesson. If you're going to put a mechanic in an event, make sure that what you're doing is something players notice and they need to react to it.
So of the many EverQuest expansions that you've worked on, which has been your favorite and why?
Oh, there's a couple. I think I like Depths of Dark Hollow the most. I like the gothic horror theme. That was an expansion that had a lot of vampires and werewolves and undead, and we were able to fairly well hide the final antagonist in the expansion. This was tough to keep secret because it meant everybody from the artists to the designers to the programmers had to keep their lips sealed about who it was. But Mayong was the final bad guy, and we did a pretty good job of keeping that secret until players got there.
So on the flip side of that coin, which expansion that you've worked on was the most challenging and why?
That was probably Gates of Discord. It was challenging for a lot of different reasons. The team was pretty new at that point. A lot of the experienced staff had peeled off to go work on EQ2 or different projects, and so we were new, we were young, we were struggling to figure things out. We hadn't quite found our footing yet as far as learning to use the tools and the best implementation practices. So there were a lot of days where you're banging your head against the wall trying to get something to work, and at 4 a.m. you're like, I give up, I'm gonna do it tomorrow.
So what are some ways that designing an expansion differs from designing a brand new game? Or to put it another way, what are some elements of designing an expansion that most players may not notice but are integral to development?
I like to say that it's finding familiarity as well as finding something novel. You want it to be similar enough to what they already know to tap into nostalgia, to feature familiar faces and places and things they already recognize. So it still feels like EverQuest, but there needs to be enough of a twist in what you're doing and where you're going and what you're seeing, that it's not a carbon copy.
Sure.
It's finding that balance between new-ish and nostalgish.
How's the process of designing expansion content and then implementing it changed from when you became a designer to now?
We've got way better tools now. The scripting system has improved by leaps and bounds. When it was introduced when I first joined the team, it was pretty limited in what you could do and how you can do it. But over time, we continue to get more script functions that allow us to read and modify more things in the game, so we can create more interesting content.
So, you folks are here at GDC celebrating your 20th anniversary. How early did the team begin brainstorming content ideas for the 20th anniversary of EverQuest?
We were working on that well into last year, like early last year, middle last year, and some of that content actually was created years ago. This is something that got cut for scope reasons, but we decided to reinvigorate it and revitalize it and complete it and put it in for the expansion, which is harder than it sounds. Like having content that's kind of done helps because there's something there to start with, but you also have to modify a bunch of things. If the content was created in 2014, it needs quite a bit of revision to work in 2019.
You gotta come back, dust it off.
Yeah.
Figure out what was I thinking when I sat down to do this.
What was the person who's not here anymore thinking when they did this? And
yeah, sure.
And this is way too easy because this is from 5 years ago. So.
Mm-hmm. So, did you want the expansion to be just another expansion, or did you and the team want to do something special to celebrate such a significant milestone?
We wanted to go back to Planes of Power. I think that was kind of at the height of like classic EverQuest's success, and that's what players are really familiar with. And so we wanted to go back and see that content again. And again, it's not exactly the same. It's not like going back to the exact same planes, but you did go back to Plane of Fire, and you go to some combinations of elemental planes.
And tell us about some of the content you designed for the 20th anniversary and what stands out to you about it.
Sure. So I did one of the raids in No Memorial Mountain, the zone that we released, and it's called the Night at the Museum. So inside Gnome Mountain, they've memorialized a bunch of old clockworks as artifacts, and they have them on podiums. And there's like a docent who walks around and talks about like the different artifacts and what they mean, and you can talk to her, and she's like, yeah, I know there's rumors that like at night when no one else is around, these things come to life, but I don't buy it. And then if you insist that she leave, and then all the robots come to life and attack. So that was fun. It was I think EverQuest has a sense of playfulness and fun to it. Not everything is super grimdark serious, especially when it comes to doing stuff for the anniversary. That stuff tends to be our most kind of fun and zany. And I think Gnome stuff kind of fits with that and that raid.
Yeah. EverQuest was noteworthy for, among other reasons, being the first 3D MMO. In your opinion, what else did it do differently from earlier MMOs, such as Ultima Online, that contributed to its rise and prominence? What do you think you folks really did to innovate
differently? I feel like the raid concept in EverQuest was new, and I feel like the way it evolved and the way it started was sort of unique and novel, and I feel like it is kind of now the benchmark for how raiding should work in an MMO. It seems like they kind of sprang on it also almost on accident. They put a big dragon in a room, make it harder than other stuff, give it some loot, and then players will show up in vast numbers and work together as a cohesive and large raid construct to defeat that and get the rewards. And then you realize that doesn't give you enough content for the thousands of people on your server, because the dragon only spawns once a week. So then you have to make more raids, or find ways that players can trigger these raids, or have their own private instances for raids. And I think that the system has evolved
What do you feel accounts for the game's just enduring status? I mean, this is the 20th year.
Yay!
And you know, your fans are crazy about the game still, and still really care about it. And I just remember the days of playing it with my friends and having great experiences. So it's like, what do you think has led to it to endure over time in a video game industry where, you know, we're on Twitch. What's the next thing, you know?
Yeah, what's the next game this month? Yeah. I think there's several different reasons. Nostalgia is a big part of it. I think people have a real fond place in their heart for what they were doing in EverQuest and kind of who they were when they were playing it, whether it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 years ago. It still triggers my nostalgia big time to log into Greater Fairdark and hear the Greater Fairdark song and see all the trees. And it takes me right back to 20 years ago. And I think they found a core gameplay style that worked. I think they took the MUD core game loop and then put a 3D skin on it. And of course, it's got its own twists and modifications. But like they took what was fun in a similar kind of game and put a pretty skin on it, and a 3D skin on it, and knew that was a gameplay that would work. So they started with a really good foundation, I think, gameplay-wise. And I think it's a testament to the team and the players that we continue to work on it, continue to listen to the players and make changes and address things when they're not as good as they could be, and continue to work with them and they work with us to make the game bigger and better. Do it for Shacknews.
Oh yeah.